So if a country exposes itself to world trade in a commodity where the world price is lower than the domestic price in autarky, and remember, autarky means a country that does not trade. So if a country exposes itself to world trade after the economy has been in autarky, and the world price is lower than the autarky price, the price is going to fall, and domestic consumption is going to increase, production is going to fall, and there will be imports. And we talked about a situation where we were importing 195 coffees and had a total surplus of $6,175 after imports, with consumer surplus quite large and producer surplus quite small. So the producers in this situation might not be very happy and might be able to go to the government and ask for a tariff. So a tariff is an excise tax on imports. And so what would happen is that the world price plus the tariff would become the new price that consumers would face, and that then consumers could sell this good at. So let's assume that we have a $20 tariff added to our $15 world price. And so now the new price that is faced by both consumers and producers is $35. So at $35, producers are going to increase production from the 25 they had before the tariff to 75, and consumers who had been consuming 220 now at this new price of 35 are going to be reducing their consumption to 140. So consumer surplus is going to shrink from where it was before the tariff went in, and it's going to be down to this triangle here. So this will be our new consumer surplus after the tariff. And so the consumer surplus would be 1/2 times the new quantity consumed, which is 140, times the intercept minus the new price, which is the price, the world price plus the tariff. And so that's going to equal 2,450. The producer surplus increases because of the tariff, and so the producer surplus is now this triangle here, and so the producer surplus is going to be 1/2 times the new quantity produced times the world price plus the tariff minus the intercept 5. So this is now going to equal 125. Excuse me, this is now going to equal 1125. It was 125 before the tariff. It's now increased significantly to 1125. One factor of tariffs, some might call it a benefit, is that the government does collect revenue. The government's going to collect the amount of the tariff times the amount of imports. So remember, the tax only goes on the import, not on all coffee sold, just on the imports. And so our imports, which were 195 before the tariff, are now going to be down to 75, 140, down to 65, 140 minus 75. And then the tariff was, as I mentioned, was $20 per pound. So the revenue that the government is going to get is going to equal the amount of the tariff times the quantity imported, so 65 times 20, which equals 1,300. So economists would argue that this is not the ideal situation for society. We had a total surplus before of 6,175. Now we have a total surplus of the 2450, 1125 plus the 1,300. And the difference is what we're going to call deadweight loss, which is that we have this area here plus this area here that were part of total surplus before the tariff went in, that is now no longer part of total surplus, is not part of producer surplus, not part of consumer surplus, and not part of the revenue that the government is going to collect, but is just a loss to society, a gain from trade, a benefit to our society from the fact that we now are paying a higher price for coffee, and so some of our previous benefit from trade has been taken away because of the tariff. And we can actually calculate the dead weight loss. This area here is 1/2 times, and dead weight loss is always about a change in quantity. So it's this is the 220 minus 140 times the amount of the tariff, which is $20. So that's 800. Plus this triangle here, 1/2, again, it's a change in quantity, 75 minus 25 times the amount of the tariff, which equals 500. And so the total loss to society from the tariff is $1,300. Now this framework assumes that consumers are going to be paying the entire amount of the tariff in terms of higher prices, that it's going to go from $15 to $35 because of the tariff, so that the $20 tariff is going to lead directly to an increase in prices. Now, not all of the arguments for tariffs are wrong. We are going to see an increase in employment in the coffee industry. That is true. We are going to see an increase in profits in the firms in the coffee industry. That is true. This is one reason why there are folks that will advocate for tariffs in a particular industry. We would argue that the society doesn't have the comparative advantage in coffee, and so that these additional resources that are being put into coffee production because of the tariff would be better off used producing something where the country does have a comparative advantage. But there is no question that there is a benefit to the actual number of workers in the coffee industry and to the profits of the companies in the coffee industry after the tariff. We've also seen that tariffs haven't necessarily increased prices $1 for dollar so far in 2025, as would be predicted by this particular theory. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, there's a lot of evidence that firms imported a lot of goods at the beginning of 2025 before the tariffs went into effect, and stockpiled them in inventory that is still being sold off today at prices that are not affected by the tariff because the imports came in. Secondly, this framework does assume a competitive market and a perfectly elastic world supply curve for the good. As we will learn in future weeks, most markets are not necessarily perfectly competitive, and that firms in industries that are not perfectly competitive have market power and an ability to raise prices above the competitive level. So if the prices were already above the competitive level before the tariff went into effect, the firms would have some ability to absorb those tariff increases and not have to push them on to their consumers in the form of higher prices. A third reason is that this framework assumes that there's a commodity that it faces a uniform tariff no matter where the good is being imported from. In fact, what we've seen here in 2025 is a lot of country-specific tariffs. And coffee is a good example where the United States imports coffee from a variety of different countries, and those countries are facing different tariff rates from each other. So within that framework, we're not going to necessarily see a dollar-for-dollar increase in coffee prices based on the amount of tariffs that might be imposed on coffee producers or coffee imports. Tariffs are always on imports, so imposed on coffee imports. Finally, this framework assumes that the tariff is being imposed on a good that is being consumed directly by the consumer. In fact, many tariffs have gone on to goods that we would call intermediate goods. They are used in production of other goods. And so, steel is an import into cars, cotton is an import into shirts. So the price increase might be fully paid by the importer on the intermediate good, and that importer might be actually passing that tariff on to the consumer, but it's not necessarily going to be dollar for dollar because the imported good is only a part of the final good that the consumer purchases.